gospel that we remember of Thomas, one of the apostles, and it's very interesting that the epistle reading that is coupled with the gospel reading speaks about faith. First, we hear about Thomas, who is asked by Christ not to be faithless, but believing. And then we have people who are confronted with St. Peter, where he's walking on the road, and they had so much faith in understanding him that the epistle says that even when his shadow passed over them, they were healed. But the message that we have from today's gospel is a very important message to us, is not to forget what God has done for us. Not to look at him and re-question him after he has shown us so much of who he is. You know, it's interesting that there's that, I think it's in economics that says, what have you done for me lately? It's kind of whatever the last thing is that you've done, you're always evaluated on. And they say, you know, that even for those who are the vintage of Gerald Ford, you remember seeing him, and what's he known for? Falling off the airplane, right? Falling off Air Force One, he comes down the stairs and he trips and falls. They always say that it's better to fall all the way down the staircase and land on your feet than to make a dramatic entrance down the staircase and then land on your face. And we hear about St. Thomas today, who was there with Christ from the very beginning. He saw the miracles, he saw the healings, he saw the blind man be healed, he saw the flow of blood cease in the woman. He saw all these things. But yet, he says to his brothers, the 12 total that were together, he says to the remaining brothers, unless I see in his hands the print of the nails, I'm not going to believe you. Now, you have to look at how the apostles were called. When they were called, they were said, come with me, we have found the Christ, the one that the scriptures have written of. And what did? They left and they followed him. They followed him not only because of Christ's call, but also because of the call of the other disciples at that time. So he says in the midst of them, I'm not going to believe it unless I see it with my own eyes. Unless I put my finger in there. It's even worse than saying, you know, unless I see it, I'm not going to believe. He says, unless I take my finger and put it in the hole where the nail was in his hand, and unless I put my hand in his side where he was cut, I'm not going to believe it. Well, that is just exactly, I mean, it sounds bad, but it's exactly what we do too, right? Sometimes seeing is not enough for us. Sometimes we have to have the tactile experience of something. We have to feel it. You know, even when we think of our experiences with God, we might say, you know, I had a dream about God last night or whatever, and you say, yeah, it was a dream. But if he was only real, if he was only there, if I could only touch him, if he only came in front of me. And it's the same exact thing as we hear in today's gospel reading, that we need more and more and more. We need something tangible. We have to not only touch Christ, but he says, it's not just even embracing the risen Christ, but I have to put my finger in the hole. And that's exactly what happens in our lives, is we take what we see here in church, we take our lives and we say, you know what? I need to notch it up one more step, and one more step beyond that, and another step beyond that, until I am actually dismantling God to say, is this really God? And that's exactly what Thomas wanted to do. However, what we see, which is an important thing to remember, is now some write and say that he put his hand in the side. Others say he didn't. The gospel says, in seeing, now you believe. Blessed are those who believe and don't see. But Christ didn't say, in touching me, or in putting your hand in the nail. So there's the debate of, what did he actually touch him, or did he not actually touch him? Because it doesn't say that, you know, the gospel is very clear in how it's written on certain events. I mean, they go to the bed, they tell everybody to leave the house for the daughter who's dead, and then he says, what's the matter with her? And she's sleeping, and it's very clear. So I don't think it's necessarily an omission in the gospel that doesn't say, well, then he approached Christ, he took his finger, and then he stuck it in his side. Because in the clarity of the Gospels, even the crucifixion of Christ is very clear. It says, first they went to the one thief, and then they broke his legs, and then they went to the other thief. And then when they came to him, they saw that he was already dead, and they didn't break his legs. I mean, it's very clear on those things. So the gospel says that as soon as he sees Christ, he says, my Lord and my God. Did he need to do it? Probably not. Did he do it? I doubt it. But what do you think happened after that? The embrace of him and Christ to say, my Lord and my God. And then he says, now you believe? You couldn't take the word of your brothers who spent 3 years with you day and night? You couldn't take the word that I had spoken to you? You couldn't remember the miracles that I did? You couldn't remember any of that? And now you have to see me in order to believe. And then he says, blessed are those who don't see and yet believe. So now we take the epistle with St. Peter, who's the preeminent apostle out of the 12. He's the chief, if you want to call it, the chief apostle. Walking down the street, people are laying under his shadow and being healed. By a shadow. By the casting of the shadow on the people, they're being healed. By their faith. And just to say, if my shadow, if Peter's shadow only passes over me, I will be healed. That reaching out and saying, that's all I need to be healed. Just to pass over me. So we have those two spectrums of extreme faith and that temptation to say, I need to see, I need to touch, I need to dismantle in order for me to believe. So what does this say to us? It's 2,000 years later. We're looking at this gospel reading and we really need to think, what's the connection here to us? Why every year do we remember Thomas? Well, because now we've been through Holy Week. You've seen. And the reason you've seen is because you've believed, right? You've been here, hopefully, to the services. You've hopefully have come to receive the sacraments during the week. You've seen the whole process of Christ going on the cross, to coming off the cross, to resurrecting. All those beautiful remembrances and commemorations that we have in the divine services. So we've seen it. But now what happens? It's the Sunday after. Christos Anesti is not as prevalent. Maybe we're not saying it as much. Maybe we're doing our prayers at home and we forget to say it, or we greet somebody and say, hey, what's going on? Whether it's a Christian or whether it's in church, whatever, and it starts to slip back into the past. Which means that we need to continue to be there in that faithfulness, in that strength to say, I'm there with you, God. I'm not going to fall away. I'm not going to doubt. I'm not going to ask for more signs. I know the end of the story. I know what you've done for me. And to reach out and to be there and to be present with God. Because the worst thing that we can have is after the fact of experiencing God to fall back into apathy. That's the worst thing. Because what happens is we fall back into our old ways of just wanting proof. And I think that's, pretty much everybody wants proof of something, right? It's like when, not to sidetrack my sermon here, but you think of the people who are alien chasers or UFO chasers or whatever. They're always trying to get proof, right? There's proof, there's aliens, there's this and there's that, or whatever. Whatever. We don't need that as Christians. We have the proof. The proof is the resurrection. And it happened 2,000 years ago, but it also happens every single Sunday. That's why this Sunday is the beginning of the continuation of the resurrection celebrated every week. But what's it supposed to mean for us? It's supposed to mean that every week we are resurrected. We are celebrating the fact that Christ has risen. Many times, the out of sight, out of mind mentality happens to us, that we forget about things because it's not ever present. And the calling for us during this time of the Paschal season is to bring Christ ever present in us. As we say, Christ who is everywhere and fills all things. He's everywhere. But does he fill us? Do we allow him to continue to fill us? Or do we say, you know what, that was good, and the service was long, or it was dark, it was cold, Friday night was a disaster with the power, whatever. Doesn't matter. What matters is that you are focused on continually embracing the risen Christ at this point. That you have that at the forefront of your thought and of your life so that you move forward and don't fall backwards into the way things were for you. You know, if you think of Lent, many times we look back at Lent and we say, man, that was difficult. That was terrible. Sometimes we even say it's terrible, right? We say, oh, during Lent it's such a struggle, it's so difficult, it's painful, it's this, it's that. And hopefully you're not announcing that or taking out a billboard saying what your problems are at Lent. But if you're doing it right, that's what's supposed to happen. It's supposed to be difficult. Exercising is always supposed to be difficult. Otherwise, you're not exercising. You're just moving, right? Exercising is strengthening yourself. And what happens? Some people are like, oh, you go to the gym, or maybe you don't go to the gym, but maybe if you've been there, you look and you see the one guy or the one girl, and they're drudging through, and they're sweating like somebody's, like they got their own personal rain cloud over them. And they're working, and they're struggling, and they're grunting and doing all these things. Why? Because it's work. It's work to get to where they want to be. And in our Lenten journey, it has to be work in order for us to get to where we want to be. But once we get there, we can't return back to where we were. There's no such thing as rewinding and saying, oh, well, I'm back again. On the first time we might fall from something we tried to accomplish during Lent, we can't just say, oh, I got to start all over again. I got to go through the whole thing. Hopefully, we've moved up a notch. Maybe it's not a big notch, but maybe it's a little bit. And it's something that takes us to the next level. So next year, we can move up one more notch, or one more notch, one more notch. And it's not so that we can get at the top and look down and say, oh, look at me, I'm all this. But it's so that we can move closer to God. So the important thing of today's gospel reading and today's commemoration of Thomas is not that he was a doubting Thomas. Not that he was the one who was like, you know, there's Judas, and then there's Thomas, and then there's everybody else, right? That's not the case. The case is to understand that before Pentecost, everybody had their problems. Peter had his problems. Everybody had their issues, right? Peter denies Christ 3 times. How many times on Holy Thursday did we hear about that? Several times, right? During Holy Week, we hear, and then the cock crowed, and then Peter went out and wept bitterly, right? He went out and cried. But for some reason, this Sunday, Thomas has that stigma of being the one who doesn't understand. But what is it? It's not to return back to the way we were. God bless you. It's to move forward, to be strong, and to keep the resurrection in front of you as your guidepost, so that you are constantly following towards the risen Christ and not returning back to the way we all were. Amen.